Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 46, Childish Recklessness. Subaru, the people of this city share the same power as Yorna. While running with effort along the alley, Subaru's eyes widened at the words Abel spoke. Subaru had no idea of the power of the foxwoman he had met atop the castle tower of the Crimson Lapis Castle, a woman who seemed to have an unfathomable presence and existence that could also be called the Empress that ruled over the demon city. However, since she had been chosen as one of the 9 divine generals, and had been allowed to remain alive, maintaining her life, despite rebelling against the Emperor many times, she was definitely very strong. Yorna was very strong, and to think that the whole city shared the same amount of power as her. Subaru, just imagining it is scary enough. Soul marriage technique, you've got to be. Abel, you think I am merely lining up words without pondering them over? Then, how do you explain the events that caused your limbs to shrink? The kingdom and the empire are different in the foundation of their techniques and the studies they have cultivated. Of course, there are certain phenomena you cannot possibly imagine. There is no end to the number of techniques that have been lost. Subaru, even if you say that. After all those difficult words, Subaru bit the inside of his cheek in frustration and turned his head. His feet almost got tangled, nearly causing him to fall, but he held it together so that he wouldn't be left behind by his friends. Because of their shrunken bodies, none of them, Subaru, Al, or Medium, had shoes that fit their feet perfectly. So their feet were wrapped in cloth, like improvised hobby. Were it to come untied, making him fall, they would have to stop. That'd be no good. Even if Subaru could not keep up with the conversation, at least his body should keep up. Abel, albeit, while I was thinking of it as a possibility, I thought it was an unlikely one. Al, so you're saying that you didn't know that that lady was a user of the soul marriage technique as well? Abel, even now, I am doubting if that truly is the case. It is that mad of a deed. Abel replied, lightly breathing as he ran, his Oni mask's gaze directed to their front. Al growled at those words, and Medium's face turned to Abel. Even though she was smaller, Medium seemed to be the one with the most physical energy. Subaru was still doing fine, but he would probably run out of breath before too long. It was difficult for him to keep running. Abel, halt. It appears we have managed to shake off the ones around the inn for the moment. Abel suddenly brought everyone to a stop, though he probably didn't do that, because he cared about their well-being. With the exit of the alleyway in sight, the 5 of them ducked behind a collection of scrapwood and caught their breath while keeping a watchful eye on the street. Medium, I wonder if Tarita-chan's okay. Although she's a lot more mobile than I thought she'd be. Subaru, eh? Why yes, she was like jumping and bouncing up and down and shooting her bow and arrows going like pew-pew. Al, bro, are you doing that on purpose? Or... Subaru, doing what on purpose? He tilted his head and frowned at Al's question. Had he said something strange, he wondered? He was just praising Tarita's efforts in his own way, to match Medium's admiration. In response, Al shook his head and replied with never mind as if it were nothing, and then turned his head towards Abel. And then... Al, what did you mean earlier by calling it that mad of a deed? Abel. As I stated. The soul marriage technique involves ceding a portion of one's soul to another. By soul, that would be the very root of oneself, the OD. Al, ceding. OD. Ruminating on the words, Al's voice trembled at the realization. OD was, as Abel had stated, the root of one's being, the center of not only the body, but also the more spiritual part of the being, the origin of one's mana. In this world, it was often treated as it was the same as the soul. So, perhaps the soul marriage technique could also be called the OD marriage technique. Although Subaru wasn't too sure of this. Subaru, but why do souls become stronger when they're joined together? Abel, a similar example would be the relationship between a spiritual arts user and a spirit. By entering into a contractual relationship, user and spirit connect to each other's essence. Thus, those connected can be said to draw power from one another. Physical separation has nothing to do with it. This ought to ring a bell. Subaru, a connection in which they draw power from each other, yeah, I get it, but... As he heard Abel speaking of spiritual arts users, Subaru's chest tightened. Subaru didn't have power strong enough to take pride in, but he was still a spiritual arts user. He had contracted with a pretty girl in a cute dress, Beatrice, and was able to do many things with her help. Though a bit limited. And then, there was Amelia too, yes, she was a spiritual arts user as well. Although he hadn't seen that little cat for a while. Medium, what's the matter, Subaru-chin? Subaru, it's just, making promises with spirits is an awful lot of work, and doing something like that, and with a lot of people. That's a bit. Medium, HMHM. Subaru, I was just thinking of how difficult it must be. Subaru was able to honestly convey his thoughts to Medium, who, as a good listener, did not rush him, hearing what he said with care. Respecting a contract with a spirit was very important, and it was difficult to do the same with many people. At least, Subaru could not do that with anyone but Beatrice. It wasn't only down to the fact Beatrice was a girl he held such a promise with from the get-go, but also, even if that was not the case, he wouldn't have been able to do it. Hearing Subaru's doubts, Abel nodded, voicing a, "That is correct, Abel, hence why I claimed it to be that mad of a deed." Subaru, so, the soul marriage technique is dangerous, that's what you're saying? Abel, the soul marriage technique itself can be thought as something much like the forging of a contractual relationship with a spirit. However, it is difficult to believe that it can be performed on an unlimited number of people. Subaru. Abel, albeit I stated it was a portion, it is nonetheless the seeding of the soul. It is nothing more than tearing apart the very foundation of one's being, and handing it over in an indiscriminate manner. Keeping one's ego intact is not something that can be done, usually. Or rather. No, talking about this will bring us nowhere. With a slow shake of his head, Abel spoke of the unusual nature of Yorna's soul marriage technique. To be honest, Subaru didn't understand the situation as clearly as Abel did, but he managed to understand that it was very scary. For Subaru, it'd be like sharing his soul with a bunch of people other than Beatrice. Of course, there were people with whom Subaru felt he could give away part of his soul as they wouldn't do any mischief. He didn't think that Medium or Al here would do anything wrong. But if someone asked him if he could give it to Abel, his reply would be no. And aside from that, Louis, you. Subaru, ah. She plucked at the bottom of Subaru's shirt, causing him to be distracted by the owner of that small, groaning voice. Louis, with her long golden hair tucked behind her head, had been following Subaru and the others in their escape so far without a word. No, it was not just this far. Louis was surprisingly good at listening and didn't even raise her voice, which Subaru had been worried about. She did not attract the attention of the enemy, and did what needed to be done in a timely manner. Anne. Louis. Even now, she pulled at Subaru's hem, as if looking for a way to help him cope with his anxiety, not to make him deal with her own. Subaru, you're a horrible person. A scary person. An unforgivable person. He had no doubts about it, having thought about that for a long time, more than enough time. The reason why he couldn't dump her on the spot after being sent to the Valachian Empire with her was because that girl, Rem, was trying to take care of Louis. Even now, Subaru didn't want Rem to hate him, and that was the only reason why he stayed with Louis. And yet... Al, but hey, doesn't this clear things up? Al suddenly said this to a worried Subaru, who did not shake off Louis's hand. Al's gaze turned to Abel, the two of them, masked and covered in cloth, adult and child, facing each other. As Abel looked down at him, Al pointed his thumb to his own chest. Al, the people who attacked us are under the influence of Yornanichan's soul marriage technique. Then it must have been Yornanichan who made them attack us, and that's a QED. Abel. That surely is an answer accepting the things at face value. Al, I don't like the way you're saying that. If these people are using Yornanichan's power, there's no other option. Subaru, yeah, that might not be quite right. Al, huh? Al reacted to Subaru's gentle interruption with a harsh voice. Seeing Subaru's shoulders tremble at the sound of his voice, Al touched the sheath of blue dragon sword on his back and... Al, my bad. Didn't mean to freak you out. Bro, you're saying there's another possibility? Subaru, Beatrice and I have a contract, but I'm not connected to her all the time. No, we're connected, but I don't know what she's doing right now or anything, so... Al, so you're saying someone can just borrow her power and secretly go on a rampage? Although reluctantly, Subaru nodded to Al's blunt statement. Even though he wasn't aware of the scope and conditions of the soul marriage technique in full, it was possible that causing such mischief is possible. And if so, it was not possible to say with certainty that Yorna was a bad person right now. Abel, worst case, if the enemy turns out to be Yorna Mishagier, we shall have no other option but to flee the demon city. Our competition with Albert shall not be able to continue. Al, we're being targeted by the whole city, you know. I agree with you, but... Abel, if we capture just one person it would change things. Abel muttered to himself as he touched his cheek over the Oni mask. Hearing this, Subaru opened his mouth with oh. Subaru, sure. If we can just get one of the people from the other side to talk to us, it'd be a lot clearer. Why didn't I think of that? Medium, oh, it's true. Abelchin, you're a genius. That's it. Subaru, right. Subaru and Medium jumped for joy at the answer, which seemed to clear the cloudy sky. They clapped their raised hands together and looked back at Abel and the others with great joy. However, their delight was interrupted by Abel and Al, whose true faces could not be seen. Directing his gaze at the excited duo, Al slumped his shoulders. Al, well, if we could do that, we wouldn't have any trouble. But that's what makes it so hard, you know. After all, everyone on the other side's receiving Yornanichan's power. Subaru, I see. Medium, we could have done it if only Toridachan was here. Stomping her feet on the ground, Medium was feeling a great sense of regret about her lack of ability. Subaru also felt frustration at her words. He lacked the information to take this one step further, and he had no means at hand to obtain it. Subaru, anything at all. Putting a hand over his mouth, Subaru strived hard to remember what he had done so far. Since arriving in Chaos Flame, various events and troubles had occurred in this demon city. The encounter they had with Yorna and the false emperor at the Crimson Lapis Castle. Then the next morning, the sudden infantilization, the hide-and-seek game proposed by the vicious old man, and the scary people waiting for them. They had to find a way out of this while Torida was stalling for them. If not, no matter how capable Torida was, with that many people there, they would catch her and something terrible would happen. Subaru, that. Medium, Subaru-chin? As he pondered over this and that, Subaru blinked his eyes as he felt something strange. Noticing this, Medium looked into his face. But he didn't have the time to answer her call. He had to find out just what he'd caught on just now, such was his impatience. He needed to get to the bottom of it. What he was worried about was Torida, doing her best. No, not Torida herself, but the people who were facing Torida, the scary 100 people who were after Subaru and the others. He watched from a distance as the 100 of them fought Torida. There was something strange about it. It was probably... Al, thing is, I don't understand if it's really the soul marriage technique, or if the enemy's Yornanichan or not, or if old man Albert's lying or not, I just don't get anything anymore. Subaru, hook. Subaru was surprised to see Al barking at him, while violently scratching his own neck. However, Al did not seem to notice Subaru's surprise and kicked the wall impatiently. Al had been getting less and less composed at an alarming pace. His original posture of being like an aloof willow branch that could take anything in stride seemed to be an illusion. And Al, in his frustration, continued to pester Abel. Al, what are you gonna do, Abel-chan? I can't keep going along if it's gonna continue like this, you know. I'm telling you, I got bigger priorities than getting you back on your seat. So, Abel, what you wish interests me not. But there is a method to be certain of it. Al, be certain of what? Abel, of whether their strength is due to the soul marriage technique. Pointing towards the exit of the alleyway, Abel declared so to Al, who pressed him for an answer. Outside in the darkness, the sounds of people passing by, footsteps, and talking could be heard from the street. However, it didn't mean that any of those people had noticed and were looking in. Just the hustle and bustle, that was all there was. Subaru, the street? What are we supposed? Abel, pick one passerby at random, and harm them. Then we can ascertain if Yorna Miss Higur's soul marriage technique envelopes everyone in the city or not. Subaru. Abel, if the wound heals, then they are under the influence of the soul marriage technique. If they remain wounded or lose their life, they are outside the influence of the technique, meaning, the assumption they are a user of the soul marriage technique can be dismissed as incorrect. Abel continued nonchalantly, pointing to the street. The content of the speech was so disturbing and outlandish that Subaru could not say anything. His brain was numb, he had given up even thinking. No one would take such a stupid theory seriously. Al, I see. But there's also the pattern of inhabitants not being eligible, just like us. What if we drew one of them? Abel, you can tell the difference between a resident and an outsider by looking at their footwear. Of course, it is possible that only those surrounding the outside of the inn are under the influence of the soul marriage technique. If such is the case, it shall be proof that Yorna Miss Higur has consciously set her sights on us. Subaru got that Abel was nodding as if saying that either way they would gain information, as well as Al sinking into silence, as if to say there was still room for more consideration. That discussion was difficult for Subaru to understand because it was based on complicated logic. However, even amidst the incomprehensible discussion, there were things that he understood. That was, if things continued like that, someone was going to get hurt. Subaru, but that's just... Abel, if you reject it, then what? Try presenting an alternative. Subaru, hook. Abel looked down on Subaru as he anticipated him trying to retort out of reflex. After feeling that his thoughts were being read, and that he had been called foolish, Subaru's face grew hot. But he couldn't be silenced. He didn't want to just shut up and back down. Subaru, why you don't have to hurt anyone else, there are other ways. Abel, if you have one, say it. If it is something that merits consideration, I shall listen. Although it would be unreasonable to expect that from you, presently. Subaru, well, that's. Abel, you are particularly afraid of sacrifices. As if cutting through him, a ruthless voice pierced Subaru as he was getting worked up. Feeling a pain like that of having been shot through, Subaru gritted his teeth and looked down. Sacrifice, someone getting hurt or dying. The less people died or were hurt, the better. This was a matter of course for allies, but he felt the same for enemies. The reason why Subaru thought so was because he was weak, naive, and immature. Subaru, but why's that a problem? Abel, that is not a repudiation. It is merely a fact. If you are to obtain what you desire, you shall require either ingenuity or strength. If you lack those, you must compromise by cutting back on the desired results. Such is what occurred with the process and the results brought about by the bloodless siege you spoke of. Subaru. Abel, if you want neither deaths nor wounded, you must possess the ability to bring about that result. If you truly desire it, it would be a contradiction to refuse to pay the toll. Subaru's cheeks stiffened, his eyes blinked. Abel's intentions were unclear. However, the black eyes looking through the Oni mask were fixed on Subaru, attempting to find out the true intentions behind Subaru's eyes, which had an incomparably weak light in them. I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. Really, I don't understand. What was that supposed to mean, Subaru not willing to pay the toll? Subaru was trying his utmost to use his good-for-nothing brain to think, but nothing came out. With his short limbs and small lungs, he could not jump or leap as well as Tarita. The whip he had brought with him was too thick and heavy for him to handle. Still, if he didn't want anyone to get hurt, he should. Subaru, if that's how it is, it'd be better if only I get hurt. His head a mess, Subaru shouted at Abel. He knew very well he wasn't strong enough and that he didn't think things through. But that was a problem that had always existed, even before Subaru had become small. Something hot came up from behind his closed eyes. Before that could clearly turn into tears, Subaru turned his back and started running away. Al, bro. Medium, Subaru chin. Al and Medium let out a scream at the sudden movement. However, not stopping at the calls of those two, Subaru threw himself out of the alleyway and into the street. He didn't want anyone to get hurt. He didn't want them to die. Subaru lacked both the ability and the smarts necessary for that. If something was to be traded to make up for what was missing, it was Subaru himself. He would find it out. He would bring back information that could change the situation with him at the moment he got himself back. For that reason. Subaru, come on. I'm here. Subaru ran out into the street, arms raised, shouting at the top of his lungs. A high-pitched child's voice drowned out the noise of the street, drawing the attention of those surprised. Being noticed by a number of wide-open eyes, Subaru felt a pain that made his heart shrink. Subaru, ah. Only after having done so, would someone regret doing something prematurely. The eyes of the people around him, looking at a child doing something stupid, made him feel a sudden sense of shame and fear. With that, Subaru held his breath and thought about going back to the alley. Wait. Someone grabbed Subaru's arm as the latter stepped on the ground in a hurry. His shoulders hitching, Subaru turned around. A short figure was grabbing his arm. It was a short boy with short, curly hair dressed in simple light clothing. No, his hair was not kept short, it only looked short because of the tight curls at its end. Subaru's eyes widened at the appearance of the boy, who looked about the same age as Subaru currently was. He then tried to open his mouth to ask why he had stopped him. Boy, sorry. The next moment, Subaru was flung away by the boy with a burning right eye. Subaru, eh? Overwhelmed by his spinning vision, Subaru had no idea what had happened. The boy had suddenly thrown Subaru away. With a single upward movement of his arm, he had very easily thrown him into the air. Subaru, W-ah. He had run out into the street with enthusiasm so that no one aside from him would get hurt. Why, how, those questions bounced around in his head, and he felt as if his insides were being wrung. The ones who had been fighting Tarita had the same burning eyes as the boy. If that was the effect of soul marriage Abel had told him about, then Yorna had given him a portion of her power. To confirm this, he had jumped out, saying he would sacrifice himself. All this was incomprehensible to Subaru, who was spinning and falling into the blue sky. It was an apparent miracle that his body spinning with unusual force had not hit any of the surrounding buildings or decorations. Subaru didn't even know if the boy hadn't aimed him at anything. However, Subaru was afraid of the obstacles that were passing by the edge of his vision at an incredible speed, so he fell into the blue sky, praying desperately that he wouldn't hit anything, and then he suddenly stopped. Slowly, Subaru's thrown body reached maximum height and was now falling headfirst towards the ground. Subaru, aha! The voice of the one who had left the ground now echoed as it approached the ground again. He didn't know how high he'd reached, but he had to brace himself. But he couldn't remember how to. In the first place, would he be able to manage to brace himself when falling from such a high place? Would he fall to the ground and die with his whole body broken into pieces, his head crushed, his neck broken? Death seemed to be close at hand again. Medium, Al Chin. Al, gotcha. Shortly after, mixed in with Subaru's own screams, he heard familiar strained voices. And just like that, the sound of something stretched being slashed and the sound of several long, thin objects falling down came together, and without knowing what they were, Subaru's body hit the ground. Before that, he was caught. Subaru, wah, wah, wah. Wog. A soft sensation caught him, but his momentum couldn't be stopped, and Subaru's body fell on the softness with quite a bit of force. Once he reached the edge of that soft sensation, his thrown body rolled on the hard ground, causing a moan and the taste of sand to spread in his mouth. His body ached everywhere. But Subaru, I'm alive? At the fact that he had not died, Subaru let out a dumbfounded voice. Once he managed to pull himself up, he finally realized what had happened. Al and Medium had saved Subaru with their quick thinking. In order to catch Subaru as he was falling from the sky, they had jumped on a tent of a food stall on the street, detached its anchor and stretched it to make an improvised cushion. Thanks to that, Subaru had not slammed into the ground, and his life had been saved. However, Medium, ouch. Al, og. The two people who had worked so hard to catch Subaru were not safe. Subaru, Al. Medium-san. As Subaru pulled himself up, within his field of vision were two figures lying in the street. Of course, Al and Medium, influenced by the infantilization, could not perform like they usually would. They had set up a tent to catch the falling Subaru, and had been blown away by the crash. And the bad news continued on. Boy, I was hoping that would have been the end of it. The boy who had thrown Subaru away contorted his face in pain as he said that. Surveying Subaru, and then Al and Medium, also collapsed, he covered his face with his palms in anguish. Unable to completely cover them, the flame was still present in his right eye. Subaru, why, oh you? Boy, it's necessary. Because this city. Because we cannot lose her. Subaru? Managing to pull himself up, he drew the boy's attention to himself. Though determined not to let him lay his hands on Al or Medium, the boy's answer was outside of Subaru's imagination and far from his understanding. It was just that the boy was desperate. And there was something else that made Subaru's heart sway. Subaru, you too. It was the same thing that had stuck with him when he had been struggling to think in the alley. While Tarita was fighting to help Subaru and the others escape, the faces of those facing her, with one eye burning. They all seemed to have the same pained look on their faces as the boy did. Boy, I'm sorry. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. Shaking his head, the boy slowly stepped in front of Subaru, erasing any trace of hesitation in his eyes and his expression. Even if he tried to crawl back in an attempt to escape, he could not. His legs wouldn't move. So he at least stared at the boy's face, trying not to look away, and noticed something. There was something nicely peeking out of the side of the boy's head, from his curly hair, a small horn. Seeing his white curly hair and horns, he thought he looked out of place, looked like a sheep. After that, the boy with the burning eyes gave a large swing of his hand. Subaru. Frowning and keeping his eyes open, Subaru watched, trying not to miss the boy's actions. You. A blonde girl cut in front of Subaru, and, with a dull sound and the scattering of red blood, she was sent flying, whirling around much like a leaf. Chapter 47, Unperishing. Lewis, Hook. Twirling and swirling, a petite frame whirled into the air with a feeble shriek. The young girl slowly sprung from the ground, her momentum refusing to diminish, as she bounded a number of times towards the street's edge. Colliding with the frame of the tent whose fabric had come undone, the lurched material crushed the young girl's body beneath itself with a shrill note. Subaru witnessed this spectacle, voicelessly. He could not make excuses such as not being able to comprehend what had occurred in a matter of moments. Even if it was true that he had not had the time to even stretch his hand out, all of what had transpired in a matter of moments had been definitely captured by these black pupils of his. His mind utterly boggled, he sprinted towards the hazardous street, devoid of thought. As per usual, he was spotted by the enemy and posed with danger, when Al and Medium sustained wounds in order to save Subaru, and at the same pace. Subaru, Lewis. Lewis, who had stood before Subaru and shielded him with both her arms spread open, had been strummed like a gumball. The one responsible was the young sheepman, horns growing amidst his white hair. His arms were slender, not too different from Subaru's, but had thrown Subaru up to nearly 10 meters in the air. Lewis had directly intercepted a single swing of the young boy's arm, subsequently getting blown away. He had noticed her blood scattering, so he could not possibly reckon she was unharmed. "Sheepboy, sorry." Subaru's eyes shadowed Lewis, who was buried beneath the tent's wreckage. His eardrums quivered due to the enfeebled apology, and reflected in Subaru's wavering field of vision was the figure of the young boy, arms upraised once again. He couldn't do anything so adroit as to dodge. To begin with, Subaru's own limbs had been mangled due to falling from a tall height, so he wasn't even able to move his body properly. Therefore, despite Lewis defending him and everything, he rendered it futile as well. Medium, Subaru chin. Subaru, ah. Medium, stand. A shadow leapt towards him with astonishing momentum and hammered her fair legs into the young boy's shoulders. As the young boy stepped back, his expression one of surprise. The one to have cut into that locus was Medium, her long golden hair fluttering. Her face tinged with a shade of red, she accosted Subaru to stand up. To Subaru, who had tumbled to the ground, rattling and trembling. "Medium, take care of Louis John." Yet, with no encouragement or consolation, Medium spoke to Subaru and broke into a sprint. Wielding the sole sword she had with both of her arms, with movements utterly separate from cool ones that appeared to be a dance, yet with all of her life, she attempted to pursue the young boy. The young boy too put on a strong expression, seemingly surprised by her spirit rather than her strength. "Subaru, goo, you. Whilst Medium persevered, Subaru used his now trembling limbs and did his best to stand up. Afterwards, he dashed towards the tent beneath which Lewis was crushed. Removing the parts of the collapsed structure one by one, he attempted to recover Lewis, who was trapped beneath the wreckage. "Subaru, Lewis. Hey, are you alive? Hey, Lewis." Desperately calling, Subaru once again felt warmth well up within his eyes. That bothersome warmth seemed to have been eagerly awaiting its time to come forth from the interior of Subaru's countenance since earlier. Ignoring it, hurrying and hastening, he cleared away the scraps. "Anne. Lewis, you. Subaru, Lewis." A frail groan resounded, and Subaru discovered Lewis's form, sullied by dust and debris. Having gotten buried beneath the broken tent, Lewis rolled up within the space created by the fallen brace, and barely managed to not get pulverized underneath. That was relieving. But immense anxiety instantly followed his relief. "Subaru, I can't move this." The fallen brace was about as thick as Subaru's torso, refusing to move whether pushed or pulled. Even via the use of the principle of leverage, he couldn't find a befitting weight as balance. And while searching for a way to haul Lewis out, he came upon something else. What was oozily sullying Lewis's white robes was not dust, but blots of red. "Subaru, ah." Struck with terror, his limbs turned cold and thoughts froze. This was what it meant to be deadened. It wasn't as though he had shed any blood, but he had no clue where the blood flowing within him had gone. Shouldn't a different spot be warmed by flowing blood? However, solely his heartbeats were loud enough to seem as though his heart would detonate. "Lewis, AAA." Still leaking frail groans, the red blots on Lewis's robes spread. His cold limbs unmoving, rather than assuming effort to remove the debris, he could not even comfort her by doing his best to remove it. "Subaru, Lewis. He continued to call Lewis's name, using his quivering voice. His voice cracked, and he failed to do even this decently. His tongue went numb. No, Subaru's heart was callously rejecting calling her name. Come to think of it, Subaru had kept even calling Lewis's name to a minimum. Ever since he had been hurled from the colossal tower along with Rem, he had always placed Lewis beside him. Subaru had always been vigilant towards her, shunned her, maltreated her. Yet, never even once had Lewis done anything harmful or oppressive towards Subaru. He did not wish for Rem to despise him. He did not wish for his surroundings to dread him. Fearing these things, Subaru had always refused to come in contact with Lewis, and always ultimately deferred deciding what to do with Lewis. Why did he fear Lewis so much? His benumbed brain, his chilly limbs, his parched tongue, his heart verging onto erupting, did not let him understand. He couldn't remember very well what Lewis had done to him. It seemed his memories had been befogged. In these moments, he was unable to open the drawer of reminiscences. However, there was one thing clear to him, without needing to open that drawer. That Lewis had shed blood attempting to shield Subaru. That alone was a truth he could not forget, could not avert his eyes from. "Subaru, don't die. Lewis. Subaru, don't die, Lewis. You can't die. You can't." Pushing his now small body into the brace's gaps, Subaru knelt beside Lewis. Instead of then hauling Lewis out, he simply and unavailingly vocalized. Taking Lewis's hand, gripping it tight with both of his palms, he desperately articulated whilst imbuing it with a prayer. Subaru, please don't die. Forgetting to even search for something he could do to prevent her from dying, he voiced an absurd wish. To this trembling voice of Subaru's, Lewis's eyelids faintly opened, and Lewis, you. A weak voice escaped her, as the young girl's pupils regained faint strength. Medium, Haya hook. Waving a single one of her dual swords, she had gripped both of her hands. Medium opposed the young boy before her. Whilst putting up a strong act, the young sheepman, however, easily blocked Medium's strike with his hoisted arm. Verbatim, intercepted the blade with his arm, and repelled it. Medium, arg, so solid. I can't cut through at all. So unfair. Since earlier, Medium had been slashing with her sword with the entirety of her might, only to be thwarted by the young boy's burly body on each instance. His skin, his hair, his fingers, his head, all parts of him were so solid that she had been completely brought to her knees. Him not sustaining any attacks was also a problem, but aside from that. Sheepman, hook. Medium, dangerous. The young boy's violently swung arm grazed past Medium and crashed into the ground. Feeling tremors coming from the ground, a hole larger than the hammered arm was opened in the ground. The stupendousness of the young boy's attack power also made her dizzy. The reason why Medium managed to avoid getting wholly smote by the attack was thanks to the interlude in the young boy's movements. Medium, extremely sturdy, seems very powerful too, but his techniques are poor. It was as though he was a newborn who had taken birth into a large body, Medium pondered. She had never seen a newborn who had taken birth into a large body, so she only contemplated what she sensed yet felt that annotation to be perfectly suited. For now, all she had to do was to spar with that newborn, but... Medium, I need to hurry up, or others will gather here too. Attaining a flavor of mud upon licking her lips, Medium was scorched with the impatience to not overstay. They had coincidentally dashed to a street with not many pursuers, but if they continued to be uproarious, they would get immediately noticed and the young boy's allies would assuredly all gather at this place. If people bigger than the young boy or people with a good grasp on techniques were to arrive, then she may not be capable of crossing swords anymore. Had she not been alone, then she could have at least had a plan of action, and yet... Medium, Alchin. Are you listening, Alchin? Medium raised her voice, whilst leaping and bouncing to the young boy's large swings. Medium was desperately calling for the veiled young boy crouched at the edge of her sight. No, for Al. On one hand, he was a child, in a condition that handling weapons was far worse for him than Medium, but she wished to rely on the possibility that the ways to counter dangerous situations were more than just herself. Al. However, he did not respond to Medium's implores. It wasn't as though he had hit his head and fainted when he got blown off, either. Al was conscious, and once had attempted to sincerely assist in combat. At present, he had abruptly halted his feet and had knelt down, crestfallen. Remaining crouched, Al was obstinately staring down upon his right hand through his veil. Medium, why? She whispered with a shudder. As though he had let go of, or had lost what he was supposed to have kept within his hand's grasp. Medium, Al-Chin. Gazing sidelong at Al, who forebore to stand, diffidence was inserted within Medium's innermost mind. Those very moments, strength waned from her hands wielding a weapon, and Medium powerfully gritted her teeth. This is how it's always been. Once Medium's own feelings withered, so did the strength in her body companionably. Therefore, Medium always conducted herself as positive, loud, upright. If her feelings were bright and lively, then Medium could work to her best efforts. The reason why her older brother Flop was always cheering her on with a do your best, was to push her on and support her as well. However, Flop was not here. Nor anyone who would tell her to do her best. Everyone had their hands full with their own problems, and Medium had also become small, hence she was unable to wield anything more than one sword, and was on the verge of losing to a tiny boy. There they are. Medium, ah. A voice echoed, further augmenting Medium's diffidence. As she dodged the young boy's waved arm and shifted her positions, Medium widened her eyes. What was reflected within her vision, from the opposite side of the street, appeared enemy reinforcements with flames harbored in one eye. The ferociously rushing men drew near Al's rear, who was knelt down. Even if she were to instantaneously rush towards that direction, she must evade the young boy in between. I won't make it. They'll die. Alchin, Subaruchin, Lewischan, they all will. Everyone will die. Verging on dropping the sword she grasped, Medium desperately called for her older brother within her mind. If only she once more had her older brother's voice, cheers, support. However, the new troops approaching Al were far swifter than the reach of illusionary encouragement. Al's small body was mutilated by the hand stretching from behind. Will you yet not move, fool? Before those sharp claws could reach Al, a leg stretching from the side kicked his shoulder away. Al's body toppled sideways, narrowly eluding the attack, seeking to gouge his spine out. And the one to have undertaken this violent counteraction was a man with his face concealed by an Oni mask. Medium, Abel Chin? His name spilled from her mouth, gaping wide in wonder, and Abel's senses turned towards her for a brief moment. Feeling the heat of exchanging a glance in spite of the mask, Medium's shoulders slightly slumped. Abel, who had left it to Medium and the others to confront the young boy, now stepped forth into the battlefield himself. He couldn't stand onlooking anymore. She might get scolded with these words. She disliked being scolded. On copious instances in the past, she had been scolded and hit. All the more when, despite her small stature, Medium used to eat a lot. Getting hit, getting scolded, repeat. Hence, upon gauging she would get scolded, her body curled up. Abel, Medium. Her name called, Medium slumped, dreading the reprimand that followed. However, Abel ignored her fright and resumed, saying, Abel, brace yourself. Medium. A brusque tone, dilating her eyes to the voice that quaked her eardrums, Medium powerfully grit her now small teeth. Gritting, distorting her cheeks, making her gold hair flit. Medium, MHM. I'll do my best. Her back pushed by force surging to a nearly fictitious extent, Medium smote the young boy before her. The young boy stepped back, startled by that attack, and she chased him, striking his chin up with her sword's ridge bounding from below, and kicked his defenseless build, trampling his stretched knees, and struck an identical kick to his head. With Medium suddenly turning the tide, the young boy became one-sidedly defensive. Whilst judging this to be akin to bullying, Medium brandished her fist and pounded again and again. In the midst of her punches, a voice was resurrected within her mind. That's right. Paying him back twice the fold of what they gave you feels pretty great, right? Those were the words of the benefactor who had rescued Medium and flop out of harrowing circumstances. The benefactor who taught her how to fight, how to live. Recalling those words, Medium smiled. Smiling, she thought, it doesn't feel good to hit someone much either. Medium, hiya. Thinking so, she thwacked a sweep of all her strength into the young boy's head, and his small body was blown off. An attack that normally beheaded from the side was nothing more than a strike for the sturdy young boy. Even so, somehow finishing him off alone, she must head to assist Al and Abel. You spunky little. Medium, AUH. Oh no. Excessively concentrating on her battle against the young boy, she neglected having caution towards the opponent who drew from behind. Her hair violently grabbed, Medium's body was swiftly lifted. Feet suspended in the air, she failed to counterattack at once. Medium, ugh. Ah, enough. Lurching her legs, tearing up from the pain of her hair being pulled, Medium looked back to see the one carrying her was a rhino man giant larger than Medium's unshrunk body. Skin and flesh thicker than that of the young boy, Medium's kicks amounted to nothing for him. Medium, sorry. I can't escape. Writhing and struggling, Medium inclined her head and earnestly hollered. Upon looking, the kicked Al remained collapsed on the street's ground, and the one responsible, Abel, had been surrounded by the arrived reinforcements and cornered to a wall. Medium too was aware it would be impossible for the delicate Abel to finish them all off. Thus, Medium, Abel Chin. Take Al Chin and run away. She wished for them to somehow aptly create a window and escape. Upon Medium's desperate voice, the men surrounding Abel clogged the escape route as to block his line of sight. With that, one of the men, a middle-aged Oxman, approached Abel. Oxman, I'm sorry, but we can't let you escape. Right here, you all will. Abel, you are an Oxman, the one earlier was a sheepman. Oxman, what? Abel, the ones surrounding the inn were all horned as well. Anyone can comprehend upon grasping the conditions until now. It is the horned races that are aiming for us. No fright saturated Abel's voice, who was surrounded and supposedly posed with a predicament. Rather, words transmitted from his overbearing conduct despite being surrounded perturbed the men. No, what was perturbing for them was not Abel's brazen attitude alone, but his remark itself as well. Medium, ho, Rened. Articulating so, Medium shifted her eyes and gazed at the rhino man who clutched her hair. The gigantic rhinoman's focus too was concentrated on Abel's comment just now. She discerned the presence of a single, stocky horn above the rhinoman's large nose. Now that it was pointed out, she recalled the young sheepman from earlier as well as the multitude of people Tarita had lured back at the inn, all had horns as well. Medium, but what about it? Abel, fool. Is that not the principal root of this situation? Medium, huh? Abel replied, as though having heard Medium's outcry. However, Medium could not see him from her side, and despite being told that was the reason, she failed to comprehend any of its significance. Rather than properly explaining such that she could understand, she wished for him to resume without her grasp on the matter. If not, at this rate. Abel, you can try. Oxman, eh? That was not a response to the outcry of Medium's heart. For certain, those words, announced with such solemnity, had been asserted whilst he glared at the Oxman standing at the vanguard of the men surrounding him. The Oxman widened his eyes and fixedly glared back at Abel. To the Oxman's reaction, Abel once again resumed. Abel, you can try, whether you can kill me. Oxman, will there be anything difficult about chopping your slender neck? The man's left eye flared scarlet as he stomped on the ground. Even without the effects of Yorna's soul marriage technique, it would be a simple matter for the man's bulky arm to shatter Abel's neck. And the resolve to kill necessary for fracturing his neck had already been attained by the men. Heedless, Abel intrepidly crossed his arms and pierced the opponent through the black pupils of his Oni mask. Abel, the answer to whether it is easy or not lies ahead of action. Thus, you can try. If you have that caliber, flames shall extol you. However. Oxman, however? Abel, if you lack that caliber, flames shall scorch even your soul. Now, what will you act upon? Oxman. So asserted Abel, hands crossed, whilst the Oxman drowned in silence. He was losing the psychological battle against the insouciantly standing slender man before his eyes. Of course, it would be the man's victory beyond a smidgen of doubt when it came down to brute force. Yet, what was the deal with his composed attitude? Was the answer to that not conceived within the seemingly deceptive words avowed just now? Abel, you can try. Whether you can surpass the flames named judgment. Oxman, ugh. The pressed man quivered his bulky throat and groaned. The man was covered in copious sweat, tension straining his entire body, and not even his comrades reached out to him. From the point of having seen Abel's eyes, they had been taken off the stage. The qualification to respond to Abel's speech lay only with the man standing before him and nobody else. A grating note of gnashed teeth echoed. Oxman, arg. With a note of cracking gritted teeth, the man raised both of his arms as though pressed by that ache. An attack that, rather than breaking his neck, sought to crush Abel's body and life altogether. With a blow from the man's arms, thick like a log, Abel's slender frame would get smashed to a pulp. Medium floundered in an attempt to escape her constraints, but to absolutely no avail. Al remained collapsed, paying no heed to Abel's predicament either. And Subaru and Lewis as well were. Medium, eh? Lewis had been buried under the collapsed tent, and Subaru subsequently rushed to rescue her. She could see Subaru crawl into the wreckage and clasp Lewis's hand. Seeing the buried Lewis faintly move, and the next instant, the two's form abruptly vanished from underneath the tent. Lewis, you. That juncture, the vanished Lewis shot through from directly below the Oxman's chin, who had both his arms upraised. Subaru seemed to be unknowing of what had occurred. He had clung to Lewis, who had gotten buried under the tent, slowly shedding blood, and struck her with arbitrary words, telling her to not die rather than comforting or rescuing her. Subaru thought she had moved upon those words, and on the immediately subsequent instant, Subaru's field of vision altered, as he tasted a sensation of the world being overturned. Subaru, egg. Not anything like extreme speed or halting time. Subaru had truly been moved to a separate location in the blink of an eye. That too. Abel, you. Abel uttered so, his breath halting ever so slightly upon Subaru's arrival before his eyes. Abel leisurely reclined his spine on the wall, arms crossed. By his being and the presence of the men surrounding their environs, Subaru verged on falling to his feet out of stupefaction. His tears that had welled up out of disquietude for Lewis now retracted, occluding his throat. And when it came to Lewis, who had eluded his mind due to this sudden phenomenon. Lewis, you. Oxman, gok. Twirling her body, Lewis pranced into the space between the men with the movement and agility of a pinball, striking the vitals of all, such as the head, torso and knees, compelling them to withdraw. Distending their eyes to her ability and might, the men all simultaneously leaned backward and gaped. And during the interval opened by the men's astonishment and anguish, Lewis mobilized herself onto the subsequent action. Lewis, UAAU. Crossing the gap between the men, Lewis escaped their encirclement. Her limbs on the ground like an animal, she pulled the ground from both of her hands as is and pared its surface. An act like that of violently pulling a carpet spread on the floor, of course, a carpet couldn't possibly be spread atop a street in the middle of a town. However, it seemed like the ground shifted. The men consequently all lost their balance and tumbled on the spot. Wah! What's this kid? Lewis, AU. Shed head. Amidst the disbalanced men, solely a young Dearman narrowly managed to stand firm, smacked his lips and then broke into a sprint in an attempt to seize Lewis. Lewis threw the ground surface she had pared mere moments ago at the young man. The moment the young man immediately sided aside with his arm, the ground frictionlessly returned to its former state. In other words, became a wall of earth accompanied by befitting mass and texture. Dearman, Buga. Colliding head-on with the wall of earth, the young man inclined backwards after getting a taste of the counterattack. Subsequently tearing down the ruptured wall of earth, Lewis flew outwards and her saws captured the young man's visage. The young man this time for certain toppled over with a bleeding nose. You little. Lewis, UAAU. Uprighting themselves with a delay, the men went over the young man's fallen body and drew closer to Lewis. However, the moment their fingers reached her, Lewis erased her form yet again like an illusion. The following instant, the young girl appeared atop a wall about 2 meters above, and pulled the wall's surface identical to what she had done with the ground earlier, and proceeded to return it back. The wall's surface came detached together with its mass and solidity, and rained upon the men. Arg! Shrieks and bellows reverberated through the street, as the men endowed with immense strength were made sport of by Lewis alone. Subaru viewed this spectacle, slumped and stupefied. Subaru, Lewis, that's. Raising his arm with a trembling voice, Subaru cowered in terror towards the nightmarish spectacle transpiring before his eyes. Nightmare, yes, a nightmare. This was, beyond a shadow of the doubt, the nightmare Subaru had feared. Paring off the ground and wall per her will, teleporting short distances in the blink of an eye, demonstrating combat power on par with rare martial artists, Lewis thrashed the men from next to next. It was evident that was not transcendental might which the young girl possessed by birth. No, Natsuki Subaru was au fait with all up to even that power's origin. That was the power that mustn't be, that must perish. Abel, I had reckoned she was no mere girl, I understand now. Subaru, Besides Subaru, who was yet cowering and capable of naught but watching the circumstance in a daze, so muttered Abel. As he murmured whilst watching the same scene, Subaru's eyes wavered, unknowing of his true intent. Keeping Subaru's state by the edge of his sight, Abel pointed forward, towards Lewis who was one-sidedly thrashing their pursuers. Abel, so this is the reason why you had that girl accompany you around. Subaru, why your row? He instantly sought to snarl at him in repudiation. However, if he were to then be asked why he had Lewis accompany him around, then he would fail to provide any answer. That was how it had been so far, and that was how it would be now as well. Rhino man, stop. You better listen or this girl will be gah. Lewis, AU. Beholding this, the Rhino man raised his voice in an attempt to halt the collapse of his comrades. He attempted to take Medium, who was clutched within his gigantic arm, as a hostage, but Lewis's attack reached him before he could communicate his threat. Lewis warped for a few meters in distance, and knocked the man's head from both sides using both her arms with all her strength. His ears pounded by her palms, his eyes whirled and went white as he crumbled. Medium, wa kaya. Lewis-chan? Lewis, AAAUUU. Suddenly released, Medium tumbled to the ground as Lewis jumped before her. Patting Lewis's head, she surveyed the environs, staggered. Within Medium's vision, all those who had gathered on the street were lying on the ground, collapsed. Lewis, all by herself, had trounced greater than 10 enemies. Abel, yours and the clown's true nature has been exposed. Well, it is no trouble. Subaru, this makes no sense. What the heck's going on? Abel, do not create a racket. It shall lure the other men. You go and pick up the clown. Abel jerked his chin, devoid of emotion towards having escaped his predicament, and gave his command. Ahead of where he denoted was an immobile owl crouched on the ground. Fearing if he had sustained a terrible injury whilst they were not looking, Subaru hurriedly rushed to him. Subaru, Al. Hey, are you alright? Are you wounded? Al, I'm not, alright. Subaru. Are you wounded? Where? We need to treat it immediately. Al, that's not what I'm saying. Subaru, hook. Having rushed to his side, Subaru jolted Al's shoulders, at whom he yelled with a potent voice. His head hanging low, he elevated his shivering hand and tightly clenched his right palm. Al, useless. Subaru, that's not. Al, I'm useless. My present self's gonna die. Subaru? What does that mean? Subaru attempted to ask Al, his voice quivering. However, Subaru's doubt was intercepted by a distressed voice reaching from behind. Medium, Abel Chin. You mustn't do anything cruel. Abel, remain silent. There are things that must be inquired. Medium, but still. Medium's emotional voice, to whom answered Abel's calm voice. Turning around, it was to the edge of the street that the two had headed. Fallen there was a young sheepman, the young boy who had thrown Subaru up in the air with all his might when he had first arrived at this street. The young boy awakened his body, a distinct terror on his countenance. Understandable. He had not become smaller, but was a kid in accordance with his physicality. Having been utterly overwhelmed by adults, those adults surrounding him from all directions, and on top of that being looked down upon by a man masked with a devil's visage, there was no way he would not feel terrified. Abel would display no mercy to the horrified young boy. Seizing Medium's shoulder, who attempted to stop him and compelling her to step back, Abel crouched before the young boy. The distance between their faces shortened, the flames ablaze in the fearful young boy's eye clouded his vigor. And Abel ignored the fearful young boy's attitude and hurled a question. A question, concise and straightforward. Abel, the mediator of horned races who devised this affair, that girl who named herself Tanza, where is she hiding? Divulge it, swiftly. So he inquired. End of chapters 46 and 47, Childish Recklessness.